Okay, well, thanks then for this opportunity. My name is Tizzie Mangiagalli, and I'm involved with the Robertson Museum at the moment, and we are exploring the avenues within oral history, and we're also looking at the history of Robertson to create a heritage route in the town. The town is Victorian, dates from the 1850s, and it's a farming agricultural region. And the communities within the Robertson area are typically Western Cape, with the families of your farm owners, farm workers, and associated industries. So if one looks at the history of Robertson, there's a lot of hidden histories here, because traditionally the focus has been on the big landowners, the big role players within business. But underpinning all that, there are many people who came in after 1850 in search of work. They also probably moved in with the business people, with the landowners, as a labour force. And at that stage, they were integrated into the town, in the town. So the village grew in the form of small holdings almost, although it was laid out as a town with the Dutch Reformed Church, the main sort of central, pivotal point. And surrounding the church, there were these small holdings. And as is traditional, or was traditional in our country, with labour force, 1850 onwards, you had obviously the community had come out of an earlier period where from slavery, in fact. So many of the direct descendants were in the 1850s were probably born from out of the slave period, but they were still caught up in the same labour patterns, which has continued for many years. So if one looks at early photographs of Robertson, you'll see the little cottages, some bigger houses, and the town grew gradually. There are stats available, the large houses that were built, and there was some growth here during that period. Not that drastic. It was only after the railway line arrived in probably the late 1870s when that brought new economic opportunities. People could access goods and send goods out of this area to the cities, and also obviously created a method of transport for the public. So there was quite a community grew up around the old railway station, that area. And I think we have a pattern in South Africa with most towns like that. So you'd have the steam trains that were labour intensive. And there again you have labour division in terms of people who did what, all the various kind of jobs that were allocated to certain persons, and then also, But there was a periphery of people always around who came, there were opportunities, people came in search of work, came in search of places to live. And that is how also we find church work that was being done, the formation of the Methodist Church, the old Wesleyan Chapel, which was in the centre of the town. So which kind of also proves that the town was integrated far more than it is now. Attached to that church there was a school. So, and that's within living memory that all changed. But as the town grew, unfortunately, it lost that core centre, which was the kind of the heartbeat, because most people knew each other. Perhaps it's only through perhaps a labour aspect, possibly. But there was also obviously people. There wasn't such a big cash economy, but certainly the production of food. And people kept livestock in the village. So there was always adequate milk. Poultry was here, and so on. And they planted various things, vines, fruit, wheat, and so on. And they also harvested their own crops, which then also meant they could feed themselves. And also, they traditionally households fed quite a big group of people, especially during the harvest periods. So people had at least the sustenance was available. There was very little money there, and that also meant that it hampered people's opportunities in terms of education and also better livelihood, and also for their children. Children often were trapped in the old labour patterns because of it was almost like a cashless economy. We have, of course, obviously got links with little communities like McGregor, which is close by, and people would commute back and forth. I have spoken to historians about the origins of the community, trying to understand, because I know someone who said their grandfather came from McGregor, but he, in fact, grew up in Worcester, Cecil Eso. He's quite a well-known activist during the struggle. And and I spoke to someone about this, and I was told, well, it probably was just a normal migratory pattern. So one finds that there are these migratory patterns, and especially as the town grew, people became settled here, and it became their home, which is obviously today people see themselves as from Robertson. But it's only a short while, comparatively speaking. Now, if you're looking at early history, we have very little, we are not aware of the history in terms of if you look at the environment, and the environment has changed so drastically since the early 18th century, when the first trekboere came in with their cattle and so on, their sheep. After about 1710, the first land was granted to settlers in this area. You find names in the area that still survive, like Nori, Khori. Those are indigenous names. So there are little links. And there are patches of veld, because this is Little Karoo. So if one really, you can almost take yourself back into the sort of pre-colonial period, if you're really looking for it. And I think that's where our museum could play a role and should play a role, is to try and take ourselves into that early period, to look at, to find something tangible that you can relate to, and must find footprints, imaginary footprints of the early inhabitants. Because within our communities, obviously, there are descendants still living here from that early period. We did find, there's a river, there are two rivers, actually they formed boundaries in the early Robertson, Hoop's Rivier and Willem Nels Rivier. And this was a farm in the early days. And there was negotiations to buy the farm, the Dios Dutch Church, which was this part was part of Swellendam in the early days. And the Dominee Robertson, that's where the name Robertson comes from, the Reverend Robertson, who was a Scotsman. And he used to come here to do the necessary duties, because the church obviously had to see to its flock, which was mainly the farmers. It settled farmers in this area. And then I think they established a small school on this farm, and then finally they negotiated buying the farm. I think it was a war from Mr. van Sale in the 1850s. But the two rivers, what I'm trying to say, they're traditionally watercourses are very important in South Africa in terms of where would you survive if you were living in a natural environment, and it would be along a riverbed or some source of water. And it's this being such a dry country, you wouldn't just plant yourself anywhere because you'd die of thirst. Now in the Hoop's River, where I live quite close to the Hoop's River down the road here. We were collecting stones for the garden, just ordinary stones. And we had a bag of stones, and we emptied the bag out in the garden, and then there was a digging stone. A very early Stone Age artifact came out of this bag. Now the river bed is quite deep. It must be, I don't know, say 2-3 meters in depth, but it's fairly wide, and it often gets, like now at the moment with all the rain, gets washed clean. So we have a tangible proof that people were living here possibly 500,000 years ago, perhaps even 1,000,000 years ago. It's quite an early artifact. And I think that our museum will try and become more proactive in terms of interpretation. So we would have to tell a story around that object and then elaborate on it and try and to understand the history and also kind of bring it into the present, where the community has certain challenges. And how do we, because the museum also has a social obligation. And I think what happened here is that the town's grown up the side. This is called Boerdorp. Onderdorp is the old town, below sort of Loopstraat and Van Sail Street, that area. But going up here, this is the top end of Boerdorp. And then of course it goes higher up. And it disappears at the back here, Keerkloof. And becomes, and it's actually tragic in a sense because the people there are cut off from the town. They, in fact, when they go out of their houses, they look at the surrounding hills, but they could just as well be anywhere in the world in terms of their identity. So I think that's important in terms of, for me, the identity of people, and also, how town planning can affect people. So this has been a comment. There was a study done in UCT about the situation of Robertson, where it's situated, and its the significance of the situation. And it's also, they also talk about the new developments that are almost so they're kind of isolated from the old core town, and the old core was becoming commercialized. So it's no longer the main, it's becoming now less residential almost. And you're finding people living out in these isolated pockets outside this big sort of commercial old residential area. And which means in fact also that people will even become more estranged in terms of where they are and who they are. But I would say that if the museum can somehow almost develop little pockets of knowledge, like libraries is a good venue. The museum should have it. We could have rotating exhibitions here, and that's what I'm hoping we will be able to do. Like at the moment, we are planning to do a project on women of Robertson, and it'll be within education, sport, religion. All that type of thing, and other outstanding persons, and those will then become almost like little mini travelling exhibitions, with mainly consisting of posters with photographs, printed posters with photographs and some history, and looking at various role plays over the last. And the town dates from 1850, so it'll be difficult in some instances to identify activist type persons from the early days unless it's been recorded in written form. I did some work here in the 1980s, not enough unfortunately at that stage because I wasn't really, I was involved with the museum but more as a volunteer. But there was a lady who lived here, and she grew up in Old Robertson when it was really like a farm, where most of the urban consisted of orchards, because people used to grow apricots in the early days, also. And she described her childhood, we did talk a bit, and she also we went around and looked at various properties and the histories of the families who lived in the town. But it was also not very comprehensive in terms of its total profile. So there is a need for redress here to look at those unwritten histories. So what more can I say really? Okay, well I've got a photograph of a it's the Ingesendenkerk Raad, Robertson East, 1979. As you know, the church, the Dutch Reformed Church, had in certain areas, they started quite early with mission work. And but in many of these smaller towns, the mission congregations were established after late 1890s, perhaps 1900s, and to serve the sort of growing community. Today, of course, the congregations have, they are now known as the Verenigde Gereformeerde Kerk, I think VGK Kerk. The early name was the Ingesenden Kerk. At this stage, they still had white ministers. That changed later. And yeah, I think that in terms of, the church histories are very interesting things in the Western Cape, especially in most communities, where people flocked to churches after, with the freeing of slaves, and especially after 1838, where slaves were able then to, they were allowed then to formalize their unions. They were able to marry, because they were prohibited from that in the early period. And you will find, not so much in Robertson, because that will be obviously a later period, but certainly there are families living in Robertson who also have links with the earlier period, and their great-great-grandparents would have been only able to formalize their unions with church services, church contracts after the 1830s. Worcester has got many examples of that in the Reinsekerk. But this is quite an interesting photograph. All the people are named, which is very nice, very good for research purposes. So, and most of these people, their descendants still live here, and the museum will be looking at interviewing the descendants of the Old Church Council. And obviously, when we do our research in Robertson, we will be looking at a bit of genealogy, also the activities of the people in terms of their work, their skills, activities, and that includes sport, recreation, and so on. But yeah, that's what I'm hoping to do.